Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar about artificial intelligence for a better marketing journey. Uh, Thank you so much for joining. With me are Bilal Mahmood, the CEO of ClearBrain, and Adam Biehler, the VP of mParticle Partnerships. Just a quick housekeeping item. If you have any issues with the audio or visual, please feel free to chat us at any point. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter those as well. We will have Q&A at the end, and we will answer whatever we have time for. And just lastly, we will follow up with a recording of this in case there's anything you missed and want to make sure to follow up on. And with that, I will pass it off to you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Alex. Bilal, would you like to just do a quick, brief introduction of yourself, and then we can get started here?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Bilal, co-founder and CEO of ClearBrain. Really excited to be here. Briefly about ClearBrain, our mission is very in line with the topic of this webinar in enabling every marketer to leverage AI to make better decisions. And this desire stems from my background previously as PM of data science at Optimizely, where we deployed teams of engineers and data scientists to help marketing teams predict things like conversion and churn. I actually connected then with my co-founder, Eric, who was the first SRE in Google Ads and who'd scaled predictive recommendations tenfold to millions of dollars a day. We basically put our heads together and saw the opportunity to democratize what we'd built internally at Google and Optimizely and other team members at Uber, DraftKings, so that any company could leverage what we'd built internally out of the box and predict and retarget users with personalized experiences using artificial intelligence. And so we're excited today to chat with Adam and mParticle about a joint solution where any company can leverage these things together to out of the box.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And as Alex mentioned, I lead up partnerships and business development here at mParticle. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to have the ClearBrain team and Bilal on the call here. AI is a topic that is very intriguing in the market right now. It's kind of one of the buzzwords that we hear. And we want to make sure that this presentation actually gets a little bit more granular. But before we kind of get into the how of AI, we want to talk a little bit more of the why. And we're not talking about Skynet here. We're talking about how this helps, or why this is necessary for marketers to be paying attention to it now. And it's actually relevant in your everyday life today. So with that, we're going to jump in. And everybody on this call is well aware that the digital experience has changed. But the implications of this, as consumers have moved from buying in store to buying just through web to buying or engaging brands across multiple devices, has created many variabilities and variations that have had implications in terms of how we think about what we are doing as businesses, how we're serving those customers. And with that, the job of the marketer has evolved. So when maybe the web era was born here and companies were just starting to put e-com online, a lot of the focus from a marketing standpoint was really just on acquiring new users and driving some of that initial purchase. That evolution for marketers is now the entire customer journey. So it's about acquiring and keeping those customers throughout the entire life cycle of what the customer is. And the terms that describe what a marketer is today, actually, and the roles that are part of the marketing organization have changed to evolve with that as well. So it really is about delivering a great experience across the customer journey. It's not about just focusing in a silo of how do we get more customers on board. But the challenges there are really stemming from what this notion of customer experience is, and what does a great experience actually mean. So I want to dive into that for a second. So when we talk about what great CX means, it's really built based on the concept of consumer expectations and how that overlaps with what the real experience a customer actually has. And consumer expectations is really hard to define, right? Because everybody as an individual has a different set of expectations. But for a second, I want to just kind of take you through an exercise, putting yourself in the shoes of as a buyer, as a consumer. So, everybody's heard the term perception is reality. And maybe the folks on this call, we tend to live in the tech industry. We understand what's going on behind the scenes, but for the average customer, that's even more relevant. And so the perception that they have of what an expectation for a digital experience is are set by the brands that they engage with on a daily basis. The Netflix of the world, the Airbnbs, the Amazons, the Spotifys, the Ubers. These companies are essentially setting the bar for what our customers, for what all of our customers expect in terms of how they engage with a brand. And those experiences that they deliver are really what I like to call the BMW experience. They are highly personal. They are very predictive in terms of what a customer wants to be doing. They're real time, so they're immediate. They're seamless, independent of where you're engaging those brands. And they're highly automated, driven by machines. So the amount of employees that these companies have to actually serve those experiences is far less than what you would find in a traditional organization to deliver that sort of customer satisfaction and customer experience. So you end up with this world where you have our customers. They expect this BMW experience because daily they are engaging these brands. And the traditional enterprise that is competing with these brands have a number of headwind forces that make it very, very difficult for them to actually deliver on what that experience needs to be. And some of those headwind forces, just to call them out, are the explosion of devices that people can actually engage with a brand across. And we look at voice with some of the new innovations around voice. That's a brand new channel. It has new platforms. It has new data that can be collected. Regulatory change is a massive, massive market mover. GDPR, that I'm sure we're all aware of, was recently come into effect. That has created a significant shakeup in terms of how brands are able to think about reaching and using data with their customers. The proliferation of cloud technology is making it very easy for, well, relatively, the barriers are smaller for companies to build new solutions that can solve a very specific problem in the marketing journey. And marketers, we all want to use those tools to help drive growth. And we don't actually have to go through IT anymore. We can go use a credit card and we can swipe and we can be up and running in 10 minutes with a lot of tools, which is great for the immediate term outcomes. But in terms of understanding what your customer's doing, you're just creating another silo. So cloud proliferation is continuing to make this challenge even more prevalent. And then the scarcity of developers is really becoming a challenge for these traditional enterprises, because where a lot of the data and assets that they want to use live are in traditional systems that really aren't built for today's web generation. So you need to find those sorts of key skill set and talent to be able to actually really unlock what that opens up for you. And then just the massive scale of data. So these businesses may have their own data centers, and they may not have adopted cloud yet. They should be, and I expect they are, but they may not be able to support the scale of data and take advantage of what that potentially offers. So you get this world where those headwind forces are creating a gap in between what the expectations are and what the actual experience of brand that is coming from kind of that legacy world is able to deliver on. And so that the brand experience a customer has is difficult depending on what channel. So like it may not be built for a mobile app. So the resolution may look funky. You may not even see the add to cart button. It's time consuming. So you have to log in multiple platforms because we don't necessarily know who the user is across these platforms. In a lot of cases, it's insecure if they're not built for a native platform. It may be a little bit of a hack to work around. And sometimes it's late, right? So if I'm getting an offer for a discount for something, a week later because it wasn't real-time served up, what's the point? And then I've seen scenarios where it's just dead wrong. You're assuming that I'm a person that I am not, based on other data that who knows where you got it from. So you get this world where those businesses that are set up to, in the digital era, like the Netflix of the world, are continuing to innovate, and the expectations are getting higher and higher of the customer. But the experience that these businesses can deliver are weighed back by these headwinds, and this gap continues to grow. So how do you close the gap? And that's really why we think this is an important topic, because one of the key things that we are seeing within those companies is that AI and letting machines help drive some of what these forces are causing can be a really key influencer in
closing that gap and essentially maximizing what the overlap of the expectations and the experience of your customer is, and ultimately making sure that that actual and expected user experience is on par with what those what those newer businesses are delivering. And so, your business can actually match up to what that BMW experience is. And so by unlocking AI and by unlocking, the machines and the data and those forces, instead of those being a headwind, they become a growth tailwind for you. And that's really why this topic is so important. And we're not saying you have to re-architect your business. You can do a lot of what we are talking about today immediately. And that's really what we want you to walk away from here with. So please ask questions around it. But once you've done this, you really can let your current customers inform you how and where to find your next customer. So instead of having to hire 10 new people, you should be hiring, don't get me wrong, but you can now use automation to drive where and when to find new customers. You can let your customers engage on all of these screens and be sure that you have the right experience that's seamless. And this is done at scale because machines are doing the work and it's entirely automated. Your business can be agile and iterative. And so as new changes come downstream, you can still use your data and you can still match up to whatever those new expectations are. And your engineers can focus on delivering on the core problems that your business has. And doing that with mParticle and ClearBrain is really kind of core in what we think are these kind of 4 basic stages to get going right now with AI. So we're going to dig in a little bit on these topics, but that's kind of the why of why we think this is really important for you to be paying attention in today's market ecosystem and digital ecosystem. It's not a future state. This is a now state. Your customers' expectations are at that level right now. And every day that you're not actually trying to catch up, you're probably going in the opposite direction. So we really think that the kind of core of this, and this is from an mParticle lens, but I think anybody who's kind of played in the data space understands that the implementation is the foundational layer that really will set the groundwork for how successful you are with anything downstream. And that may be a personalization initiative, that may be something as simple as sending an email. From our lens, implementation really starts with understanding what are the different components of your business and the business KPIs that you want to be optimizing around. We tend to group everything into kind of 5 key buckets from a data standpoint, looking at e-commerce data. And we have a number of customers in the e-commerce space, so we tend to create a tier 1 hierarchy around e-commerce from our perspective. But digging in there, what are the attributes that are associated to a product? So you have to collect all of the relevant data that you want to be optimizing around from an e-commerce standpoint. Lifecycle events, whether it's an open of an app, whether it's closing an app, whether it's in the background. And then really, what is the user doing? What are their behaviors? What are the IDs associated to that user and the attributes that are firm data points associated to that user? Every business is different, right? So you need the flexibility to extend a data model to be able to collect all the different custom events that are relevant to what drives conversion in your business, but may not be applicable to other businesses. And sometimes those are the competitive differentiation points that will allow you to really optimize where you're driving growth. And then kind of the standard screen information. So for us, it's really about making sure you've thought through all of these points and understanding how those points should be coming together from all the different places a customer interacts, and collecting that and unifying that data in a standard way so that independent of where it's being generated, where those touch points are generating data from your customer, native at an iOS level or within a cloud service that your company uses to make sure that you're providing support on a case that's been filed very rapidly. Or maybe it's sitting in a back-end data warehouse where you want to load it up from a server-side API. Or maybe it's just in a spreadsheet. No matter where it is, you need to be able to map all of that data to a standard data model and kind of create this canonical format for essentially what your customer is and what they are doing. So who is your customer, identifying them, and what are the behaviors that they're taking across the different places that they would engage your brand. And so once you've done that, you now have this foundation. But as you're doing it, you need to be thinking about, okay, well, where am I today going to want to get that data to, and in what format? And then tomorrow, where am I going to want to get that data to? Well, you just have to understand conceptually, maybe you're in the early stages of a business and you're just trying to gain adoption. So you want to just be sending that data to an advertising platform. That's fine, but you're eventually going to want to run email marketing. You're going to eventually want to have a case management system. Well, now if you've thought through kind of that data foundation, you have this kind of this baseline that you can build from, and you can get your data there really rapidly. So once customers have this, they now have the ability to spin data within their analytics platforms, but they can also immediately start taking advantage of it from a predictive and recommendation lens. And that's really where we start touching on what ClearBrain can bring to the table here and how we work with machine learning vendors like ClearBrain. So with that, I'm going to start handing off to you, Bilal, and you can kind of take it from there.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks for walking through the foundation of what's necessary to enable machine learning automation. So taking a step back again, kind of like the way both ClearBrain and mParticle view the world is that there's 4 stages of predictive personalization, where the high-level objective is that you want to enable you want to be as good as Netflix, Amazon, Uber at personalizing user experiences to an individual person to have the right message at the right time at the right place. And again, what's blocking most companies from doing this stems from these 4 stages of what's missing, which is the machine learning automation component. These companies are able to map intent or interest by content, product, or price, and recommend specific content and push recommendations and drive incremental revenue by targeting the right person. And so, like Adam just walked through, the first stage was to enable this kind of machine learning based automation is using statistics to understand past behavior to recommend future actions. You need to actually instrument your data in the right format. So once you've used a tool like mParticle, you'll have instrumented the entire user journey from first touch to conversion and have developed all the digital signals that a machine learning model can actually understand. The second stage that then becomes important is predictive segmentation. So once you've instrumented all this data in the right foundation, you have the user journey mapped in a way that a machine learning model can have the base of signals to then leverage. And so the goal as predictive personalization is to optimize for a conversion event, say add to cart in this example. So with traditional based segmentation, what you would do if you didn't have machine learning is you would pick a couple attributes or events to define the segment of users that you would add to cart. For instance, you would say something like, I want to retarget people with an add to cart message with, like, say, a banana versus an apple, based on maybe that they did some other things that relate to apples, or they were in some specific region, or they were referred to a specific type. But it requires your own human intuition, which is often pretty good, but it's limited in terms of the number of parameters that you can use to define that audience. And so instead, when you look at this from a predictive lens, what if you could instead flip this logic on its head? And instead of segmenting by 2, 3, 4, 5 attributes to define your add to cart message, you could instead build that audience based on hundreds, if not thousands of signals, and instead segment by every potential behavior or every potential attribute that you instrumented in tools like mParticle to then leverage out of the box, and to instead be targeting based on one attribute, which is just a user's likelihood to add to cart. So the problem with that is that a human can't go through and develop the signals and the weights for every right permutation of every attribute and behavior. And oftentimes those behaviors and attributes, their relative weighting to each other towards the goal of add to cart is going to change. Changes every day, every week, by cohort, by region, by location. So how can you do all those permutations? And that's where a machine learning model comes in. So if you use a tool like ClearBrain, what we essentially do is take the data that you've instrumented in step 1 that Adam outlined with mParticle, and we will automatically ingest and transform the data into a machine readable format. Machine learning models really quickly only understand things in Boolean and continuous variables. So this enables an automated platform that can obfuscate a lot of the complexity for the marketer, so that you just have a point and click interface where you point and click, define the conversion event, say add to cart. The model will automatically then look in the past who added to cart and who didn't, and compare their attributes and behaviors and weigh them appropriately. And so this way you can build prioritized lists of users by their probability to actually do the action that you're trying to incentivize your users to do, rather than necessarily using heuristics or guesses to actually build the right kind of like mixed of attributes or behaviors based on the past. And so that's kind of the first step. The third step then becomes, once you have in stage 3, once you have this predictive segment, you essentially now have a list of users and their propensity to actually do an action. You have a list of users and essentially a score. It could be a number between 1 and 100. In ClearBrain, we give you a number between 0 and 1 for the, say, add to cart action that you're trying to incentivize. But simply knowing what a user is going to do doesn't actually like help them do that action. They're just sitting in a CSV in a list. So what do you actually do to kind of move them over the hump? And so in kind of this predictive personalization pipeline in these 4 stages that we're walking through, there's really kind of 3 buckets of actions that you can take once you have a predicted segment of users. And so the way we outline is that you can either recommend them to be in an inclusion or exclusion group as part of an audience. You can recommend different content, and you can recommend different pricing. And so I'll walk through either of these and what these kind of mean in a little more detail. So the first is if you have a predicted set of users to say, you know, which users are predicted to have an affinity to potentially kind of buy a product in a given week, you could then, in say an ad, define which users to actually include in your ad group or say your Facebook custom audience, and which ones to exclude. And so say you're optimizing for incrementality of ad spend, you should probably exclude people who have a really high probability to convert because your ad dollars are being wasted. They're going to convert with or without your ad. And similarly, for the low probability people, you'll get people who are clicking on ads but don't actually ever convert, hypothetically, so you should probably exclude them as well. And so just include the people who are like this middle probability that you can actually influence their behavior, and you actually can maximize the ROI and then reduce the CPA in that capacity. The second thing that you can do is kind of recommending different content. So back to the add to cart example, if you have done a prediction for which users are most likely to add to cart an apple versus a banana, you could now recommend different content in your emails or your ads or even on-site personalization. When a user has a high probability to be interested in an apple versus a banana, instead of generically just kind of showing them the entire product catalog, you could actually show them the product that you think they are recommended to buy based on their historical profile that the model is recommended, which is basically essentially what Amazon and all these other e-commerce companies do at scale, or specifically within the right time. So someone might be interested in a apple at 5 o'clock, but they're not interested at 7 o'clock. And so how can you know that intent based on behavior? And so that's where a machine learning model can be able to recommend that action you can take. And the last is actually kind of like price elasticity. So if you knew a user's probability or affinity for any specific product, you could adjust the pricing that you're actually doing to actually market to those users. So for instance, if you have a discount or an offer or coupon that you're giving, normally what you do is offer a discount to everyone because you don't have a way of kind of knowing their affinity for the product. So you give a 20% discount to everyone. The problem with that, similar to kind of an ad bidding issue, is that for the highest probability people, you're kind of wasting money or you're wasting potential revenue because these people who have a 90% probability or higher to actually buy your product, they're going to do it with or without your discount or coupon anyway. So you probably shouldn't be giving them a discount. And so again, with a machine learning based approach or predictive segmentation approach, if you knew the probability of a user to actually convert or buy, you could develop proportional discounts relative to the actual probability to convert, and then give a segmented by user kind of price or discount to actually maximize kind of the supply and demand curve in that capacity. And so that's kind of like the 3 ways that you can actually kind of like personalize an experience using a predictive based segmentation approach. And then the last stage is then, again, if you have this kind of like you have instrumented your data, you have the foundation, you've converted it into personalized statistically based audiences that are based on the intent of a user to actually convert. And then stage 3, you've actually then figured out what to actually personalize in your app. You still need to activate on those users and deliver that experience. That's where also, again, mParticle comes back in, is that combination of ClearBrain and mParticle, you develop these recommendations and these kind of personalizations, and then you actually sync them into the platform that you want to use. So with the recommendations around inclusion versus exclusion groups, you can then personalize your ad audiences based on who to include or exclude in the ads. When you want to recommend different content, you could integrate, you can sync these ClearBrain scores directly into a tool like Optimizely for personalization, to have an attribute to define which users to show a specific experience and not, or back into mParticle for API, via an API integration that you can then personalize the on-site experiences by recommending different content or different discounts or coupons directly within the site, or into email platforms directly to trigger based on the capacity. And so this allows you to end-to-end essentially have that vision that Adam was outlining before, an end-to-end automated experience that is personalized to the individual user level rather than by the kind of a historical based audience level, around personalized experiences based on what they actually want or need and at what time, rather than guesses of what you think they might need to actually deliver the right experience to the right user at the right time. And that kind of closes the kind of the 4 stages of predictive personalization, and how tools like ClearBrain and mParticle combined give you the foundation to automate this entire process in minutes rather than having to spend months, if not years, on building this in-house automatically. But yeah, that's kind of like the holistic journey in that capacity.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So, I think we want to get into some questions here as they're coming in. But, anything else you want to comment on before we jump in? Questions, Bilal?
I think, one thing would also be, I think there's some kind of like trends that Adam kind of hinted on earlier in terms of the complexity and the changing market of the data ecosystem. And I think one of the things that's kind of like in a post-GDPR ecosystem that's going to be really important is that we're now operating in a world where advertising based on third-party data enrichment is getting a little bit more kind of like uncomfortable, or also kind of like it's not really great in the current political climate. And so one kind of like really promising benefit about machine learning and predictive personalization is that it essentially enables you to leverage your first-party data in a new and exciting way. You're essentially extracting new audience segments, new attributes, new properties about your users to develop first-party data from more first-party data from first-party data, and know how to target based on intent and what actually the customer possibly actually wants, rather than having to guess or use data brokers or enrich data from other tools that kind of like do weird things in how they actually gather data. This enables you to, from a statistical standpoint, derive signals or input from the data that you've already collected. And I think at the foundation of having mParticle be a first-party data collection tool to then leveraging ClearBrain on top of that is a really exciting opportunity in this current climate to enable you to activate on more data that you've already collected.
Yeah, no, that is 100% what we are seeing as well on our side, especially as people are responding to some of these regulatory changes. Awesome. So I'm going to jump in here with some of these questions. So one question, Bilal, if you were giving advice to someone wanting to undertake a machine learning journey, what's the low-hanging fruit you would recommend they start optimizing around?
Yeah, sure. So for every company, I think it's going to be a little bit different, but I think the way we like to position it is what is the conversion event that you are trying to maximize in your user journey? And so the event that tends to work the best for machine learning in general is having a large sample size and have a lot of digital signals. So every company, I think, can map out their user journey from first touch to conversion, and there's kind of a funnel and drop-off analysis. And so I'd map out that journey and identify which is the conversion event that's the most interesting for you. And I think trying to maximize that predict that action, and then actually be able to maximize that. Another thing that I think people don't leverage too much that I would like to see more people do is actually activating on existing users. And I think that's one benefit, is that with machine learning, you can automate that approach. And I've seen a lot of companies that will focus a lot on new user acquisition, and just kind of driving more and more people in the funnel. But if they're kind of going into a funnel that doesn't optimize for them, you're kind of just like pushing people into like a sinking ship. So instead, machine learning can actually, and it's complex to think through all the potential signals and permutations of a personalized experience post sign up or post first acquisition. So the benefit of machine learning is I'd actually recommend kind of activation or upsell or re-engagement. So having a personalized predictive approach to predicting re-engagements, have re-engagement scores around people who are most likely to become inactive, who are most likely to churn, who's most likely to cross-sell, upsell, build predictive audiences based on that, and automate workflows around that. Automate email drip campaigns, ad retargeting campaigns to automate that experience post funnel, which is kind of like a tried and true. You can actually just automate that, and then focus your energy again on new user acquisition, which often requires more of a human touch of kind of brand, content, display, more creative aspects, and let the machine learning take care of the post acquisition side in that capacity.
Yeah, and I would add to that question. One of the reasons that we think that a CDP plus machine learning solution is right is that when you're undertaking this machine learning journey and you're identifying those conversion events, a lot of times the marketer may not know exactly what they are. Right? That's a little bit of a journey as well. So you need flexibility in terms of like how you can iterate on what events are important for your business.
and which ones you should be optimizing around. And I think that the foundational layer that the CDP brings, plus the point and click integration solution with the ClearBrain, allows you to evolve as you learn more about, well, maybe this event isn't as essential to driving people through the funnel as we thought it was. So maybe we should be optimizing actually higher up in the funnel around how do we get people to just provide consent and allow us to collect the information that will help us to deliver a more targeted experience downstream. So having the foundational layer where everything's standardized allows you to have flexibility with where you start. And then from there, back to kind of what Bilal was talking about, you have this ability to just optimize around what is important to your particular business.
That's actually a really good point. One thing we've seen customers who use ClearBrain for is that the ability to have a automated predictive audience segmentation tool enables you to answer a lot of those questions a lot faster. So you can point and click, define some event that you have an idea about that you want to predict, and within minutes you get the report or the scores of all your users. And what people often find is what I mentioned a little bit back in a couple of slides is that what the machine learning model is doing is it's automatically weighing every previous behavior or every previous attribute that a user could have before that conversion event and weighing it and assessing its relative importance. And in the platform, we actually expose each of those weights and attributes and their sensitivities, kind of indicating which ones are more important, which ones are less important. And oftentimes customers will find that like, oh, this conversion event, what I really should be targeting is this upstream event, because oftentimes the actual conversion event has too few users actually doing it. So let's maximize for the thing that's next up the funnel that actually you have a higher sample size of people to actually do. A good example for this is churn. Predicting who's going to churn isn't necessarily that helpful, because when they're about to churn, you've already probably lost them. And what we find is when they use a predictive segmentation like ClearBrain to actually define the indicators of churn, they're able to work backwards and say, oh, these are the things upstream of churn that I should actually have been optimizing for. And they actually then build predictions off of those things and then optimize for those instead. And so, yeah, totally right. And I think the benefit, again, of mParticle is that you can instrument all these things across the entire user journey, and the model will determine the relative importance of them automatically. So.
And you kind of started to hit on this when you talked about activating an existing users. And so as you get started, if it's really about how do we prevent churn, the behaviors that are indicating churn may be stored in kind of like a historical database, or maybe you have them in a bunch of silos. Is it possible to take advantage of some of the historical data in terms of how you think about what we might be wanting to do moving forward when you bring on like a ClearBrain?
Yeah, great question. So another thing with back to kind of like how machine learning generally works, machine learning looks at past behavior to predict future behavior. So the more history you have, the better signals that it's able to derive on inference about what actually determines indicated behavior. So I think one of the great features of mParticle is that you can replay your data from the beginning of instrumentation. So when you plug it into a tool like ClearBrain, it's not net new. It's not just new events you have to wait and collect. You could actually replay all your historical data. And then that actually enables you to have like 6 months, years of history to kind of inform those predictive models from the get-go. Another really important thing is often the signals that are really important for most predictive models, regardless of vertical, are often attribution. What referrer source did they come from? What UTM, what browser device are they using? And so if you're only by going to the earliest of history for an individual user, if you're able to replay that, you can get those first touch points and have those automatically be leveraged in a model. And so things like attribution and first touch are really important signals in any predictive propensity-based model. And so having that historical information is really important as well.
So one of the things we talked a little bit about was the sort of customers that can really take advantage of this, and having high scale in terms of your user base and activity is obviously going to be a great sample size to work off of. But what we see is that a lot of the more innovative and kind of forward-thinking companies or individuals that want to take advantage of this tend to be in a disruptive startup where they're trying to change how businesses are built. So help us understand when it would make sense to start thinking about, we have a sample size that warrants enough, data to potentially think about, predicting what's going to happen, or machine learning or AI with that data.
Yeah, totally. So I can divide this into a couple different ways. One is from a machine learning standpoint, there's the general thing that you need enough of sample size to actually do a predictive model, to have an accurate model. What we see in ClearBrain, having done this for hundreds of companies at this point, we've onboarded and leveraged the product, is that probably a good threshold for getting an accurate model is somewhere between 25 to 50,000 users. Because if you think about what a prediction is actually doing in the end, it's basically selecting a subset of the users and identifying them as a high probability. And so within 25 to 50,000 users for any typical conversion event you'd have, that tends to be a good threshold. Now, the problem actually comes more so when you get into the stage 3 or 4, where we mentioned of like, what do you do with that information? We find that most often when you're actually doing a predicted kind of personalization experience, predicting and getting an accurate prediction is one thing, but then you need to run an experiment to prove that it actually was effective in personalization. And so for that, you usually need a larger sample size. So again, when you're doing predicting off of even 25 to 50,000 users, what you're basically identifying is the maybe 500 to 1,000 people who have a high probability to do that in a given week. And so if you then do a split test and then experiment on whether those people actually converted, you'd have to run that experiment for at least a month. Back from my Optimizely days, we found that the minimum amount of users or visitors you needed in an experiment was about 25 to 50,000, about 20 to 25,000 to run a statistically significant experiment on average. So in that capacity, if you have a maximum of 25 to 50,000 users, you have to run that like 1,000 user subset for a pretty long period of time. So the good threshold we usually see is like, ideally you're at some threshold of like maybe 250,000, 250,000 users total. And that's, I think that's what we kind of seen as maximum, kind of like the minimum threshold you use. But also, in that capacity, I think that's a good threshold. Another thing also is like by vertical. For B2B companies, we often don't work with them too much because, again, they have that low sample size and they care more about account-based predictions rather than user-based predictions. And it's hard to predict things over a high where the latency of the signal is very long. So you're often predicting conversion, which happens over 3 months, or if not a year, on a B2B SaaS basis. So it's really hard to predict those on that typical basis. And so what you're often predicting on a B2B business is just lead scoring, the first touch, which in and of itself then has very little digital signals. So it's hard to predict that in general. So my recommendation for the companies that are best enabled are kind of mid-market, medium-stage companies that have a reasonable sample size of users, but have like high digital engagement, a product with high digital engagement that can derive a lot of signal during that journey. So.
Great, that's super helpful. And so one last question here, and then we're gonna wrap up. So as a personalization and AI expert, as subject matter expert, what is the brand that you personally think of as kind of like the holy grail that is really killing it, and is what you want to enable companies? If there's one brand that you're like, they are who we aspire to enable our customers to be.
I mean, I'd say like for me, it's seeing what Amazon and Uber do. I mean, it's two brands, not one, in different contexts. I mean, Uber is able to really well be able to personalize down to the individual kind of moment of action in a second, personalize the price, personalize the recommendation, personalize the offer, recommend specific routes or specific journeys for you. With Uber Eats, they're able to recommend specific products that you might be interested in, personalize the menu, personalize the category. And I think they are able to do that really well. And I think that's a really emblematic journey for anyone can do. I think the problem with that is they have probably some of the most data engineers or data scientists at any company possible. And there's a limited supply of data engineers and data scientists, just like there's a limited supply of drivers, and they kind of have a market monopoly on that resources. So I think it's very hard for companies to replicate being Uber. Another good example is probably Stitch Fix. Outside of Uber, they probably have the highest percentage of, I think, data scientists or data engineers I've seen at a company. And they will also personalize different aspects of the marketing journey as well as within their product. And I think the admirable thing about them is that especially Stitch Fix wasn't a company that you traditionally think of as hiring or focusing on predictive first, but they did it from a very early stage. And I think that was pretty admirable on their part. And I think now in this ecosystem, there's still limited supply of data engineers, data scientists. Having a prediction ready or prediction first company is extremely important, but you don't have access to those technologies or those resources often. So how do you compete with those type of companies in e-commerce, B2C, without having to deploy millions of dollars towards that problem. And I think that's where solutions like ClearBrain and mParticle help really well. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Bilal, and the ClearBrain team there for helping one, come into the ecosystem and become a great new partner that we're really excited about, and then for joining us on the webinar here. This is awesome. We are excited to bring our mutual customers and their customers great experiences that are very relevant to those individuals moving forward. Awesome. Alex, or should we wrap up here?
No, I think this has been great. Thank you all so much for attending, and we'll follow up with the recording in the coming days.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.